may not have been able to join. Great, and we'll just be letting people in as we get going, but I just want to make sure our facilitators today have the time that they need because they have planned an amazing session for all of you, and I'm so excited to be a part of it. Welcome to TAAS. For those of you who haven't been, I'm seeing a lot of new faces who haven't been joining us in our previous sessions. Tonight's sessions is child rights and youth activism. And we have some great facilitators for all of you to interact with and to learn from. And obviously from us to learn from each of you and what you bring to this session. So we're so grateful for you to join us in our brave space and discuss and learn together. So just as a little bit of background, well, this is our annual training series that we do as of last year. So it's new and we enjoy your feedback. You will be receiving an eval survey afterwards, just so we can continue to improve this series each year. So we do appreciate if any of you are willing to share what you think about the session. I know our facilitators love the feedback as well. So we'll go ahead and introduce a little bit of our facilitators. They will be introducing themselves even more, so I don't want to take too much of their voice. But we have three amazing facilitators today. We have Adriana, Hallie, and Maddie. Each of them are heavily involved with HRE USA. Adriana and Maddie are both, excuse me, steering committee members, as well as Hallie was our most recent Edmonds Fellow this past summer. So we are so grateful for the work that they do and are excited to learn more from them. We have two students and a former teacher and a curriculum developer, and we're just excited for the work that they do in this sector. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and share my screen and just kind of pull up the objectives of today's session so you can see that. Are we on the slideshow just to make sure that I'm not? Okay, great. So obviously you can read these, but basically today we're focusing all on the CRC and on children's rights and connecting as a network. It's really important in this space, as we're all coming from different parts of the US, to join together and create impact together, as we're each kind of in our own little places doing this work. So that's another big objective for us today, is creating a network between each of you to move forward from this session, to take what you've learned and experienced and thought about and to move it into action. So we're excited for you, and without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our facilitators and they'll get us started.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. As Kaylee said, so amazing to see everybody's faces on Zoom. So we're going to just start off our session with a quick land acknowledgement. Although we are all in different areas right now, which is super exciting, really glad that we have people from all over. We really want to take a minute to acknowledge the land that, as facilitators in particular, are kind of working and teaching from. So we come to you from the contemporary and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe and Dakota peoples of central Minnesota, and from the Ohlone peoples of Berkeley and Palo Alto, California. In the chat, we're going to have posted a link from Kaylee where you can find the native land that you are currently located on. And we highly encourage everyone to take a minute to find the native land that you are currently on, wherever you're located from, and to post that in the chat. We would love to see where everybody's coming to us from. And that link is now in the chat. We would also like to acknowledge the sacred lands where we work, live, teach, learn, and build community. We recognize the repeated violations of the sovereignty, territory, and water that have impacted the original inhabitants of this land, and celebrate the citizens of these nations who live here today, as well as their ancestors who have lived here for hundreds of generations. We recognize that there is much work to be done to address the harm inflicted upon these individuals, communities, and lands. In this spirit, we highly encourage you to donate to a local native land tax. You can find more information on land taxes at this next link that Kaylee will post in the chat. At the international level, we celebrate the work of the International Indian Treaty Council, aka the IITC, who just received an Impact Award for its 50 years of treaty and human rights education work from HRE USA a couple weeks ago in one of our sessions. Locally, for some of us, we celebrate the smudging practice recently approved by St. Paul Public Schools in Minnesota as well. And lastly, we encourage you to participate in the Walk to Justice for Leonard Peltier, a push to get him released from prison. We're going to show a quick video from Che Jim, which talks about the walk that runs from September 4th through November 14th, which started in Minneapolis and is going to end in Washington, D.C. So we'll play that quick video now.
2022, the National Democratic Committee passed a resolution asking for clemency for Leonard Peltier, and no one is talking about it. And you might be asking yourself, who's Leonard Peltier? I'm glad you asked. Leonard Peltier is an Indigenous activist who is currently serving 2 life sentences for aiding and abetting, resulting in the murder of 2 FBI agents. But here's the kicker. The 2 people that he was claimed for aiding and abetting were found not guilty of murder. In order to understand how this all happened, we have to explain a little bit of the circumstance of this entire incident. What people don't know is that prior to 1978, Indigenous ceremony and ritual was actually outlawed in the United States. Ceremonial practices were a federal offense that could land you in the federal penitentiary. You could literally go to jail for praying. And it wasn't until 1978, during the American Indian Freedom of Religion Act, that this was later banished. But up until this point, illegal. And this was all during the height of the civil rights movement taking place in the United States. And many Indigenous people were going back to their traditional practices. In order to stop this, many governmental functions started hiring outside mercenaries and muscle to intimidate and in a lot of cases kill those who were practicing traditional beliefs. A lot of this taking place in the state of South Dakota. These people started calling themselves the Guardians of the Oglala Nation, also known as the Goon Squad. And during this time, extreme violence took place on Native reservations. And over a couple of years, over 60 people were murdered by this group of mercenaries. Fearing for their lives, many of these traditionalists reached out to an organization known as the American Indian Movement to protect and advocate for their freedom. Within this movement, Leonard Peltier was one of these members. People were petrified of outsiders. On June 26, 1975, 2 FBI agents were dispatched to investigate a lost pair of cowboy boots at an AIM stronghold. They rolled up in an unmarked car, did not identify themselves as officers, and pulled up with guns. The people, fearing that these were Goon Squad members, protected themselves. A shootout began, and at the end, 2 FBI agents were dead, as well as 1 AIM member. And that's how he got charged with aiding and abetting, as Leonard was present at this residence. But here's the thing. Leonard was convicted with 0 physical evidence, and prosecutors got their conviction by a few different tactics. This include falsified statements, coercion of witnesses, withholding of favorable evidence, withholding of thousands of documents from public and court officials, planting evidence, and intimidation of witnesses. All of this we know and has been proven, yet he still sits in prison. Those who have asked for his release include the Dalai Lama, Pope John Francis, members of Congress, and multiple foreign governments. Now, what can you do to help? Right now, there's a cross-country walk starting from Minneapolis all the way to D.C., organized by the American Indian Movement, and they need your help. You can help by donating, attending rallies, and being in D.C. You can join the Facebook page Leonard Peltier's Walk to Justice and walk in solidarity.
Thank you so much, Hallie, for setting that as a grounding activity and for sharing that video. And I would encourage everyone to help in the way that they can. So acknowledging the land acknowledgement, we can move on to kind of a warm-up about children's rights and kind of why we're here today. So this is a really simple exercise. It's just to be able to just raise your hand and see where everyone is at and what they're familiar with. And so there are a few statements, and they'll just be raise your hand if statements. And I would encourage you all to raise your hand either physically or virtually if you identify with these statements. So the first one is super simple. Raise your hand if you know or you've heard about the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So the CRC. Cool. That's pretty much everyone. You can lower your hands now. Raise your hand if you have read the CRC. Okay. That's still quite a few of you. Okay, you can put your hands down now. And the last one is raise your hand if you've actively used the CRC in either a school setting or other work environment. Awesome. Okay, so it sounds like a lot of people are familiar with the CRC. And so that is a good setting point. We will do a quick introduction of it in a little bit, but it is helpful to know that people are familiar with it. So I'm going to just move on to a quick reminders and norms before we begin the actual content of the workshop. Kaylee, if you want to screen share, that's perfect. So just reminders for online engagement, please mute if you're not speaking. Please leave your camera on if you are comfortable with that. You can use the chat for questions and comments if people are speaking, but also there are plenty of times where you will be able to engage verbally. And also, we love emojis if you want to use the reactions, they always help. And so a few of the HRE USA norms we've established to help create a comfortable and brave space. I'd encourage everyone to use the following behaviors, which make the acronym RESPECT, which is just responsibility, empathy, sharing, airtime, participation, enthusiasm, communication, and trust. And so that'll just build a space for all of us to be able to learn here. I'll pass it to Hallie to introduce the CRC.
Thank you, Adriana. Yeah, so we're going to get started a little bit more into the content of what the CRC is. So we will get started with a quick video from Save the Children that talks a little bit about children's rights from the perspective of children internationally.
I am a child and I have rights. I have the right to laugh. I have the right to play.
I have the right to protection against discrimination. This means that nobody can treat me badly because of my color, sex, or religion.
Eu tenho direito de ser protegido ou maltratado.
حق حساسیم است. من میخوایم به مکتب برم، خواندن و نوشتن یاد بگیرم.
Porque los derechos nos dan valor como personas. Nosotros como niños y niños también somos personas. Eso quiere decir que tenemos valor.
Hai ជាពិសេសគឺសម្រាប់ជនពិការគឺមិនត្រូវការប្រកាន់រើសអើង
ဒီရွာမှာရှိတဲ့ကလေးတွေအတွက်မိဘနဲ့တူတူနေရဖို့အခွင့်အရေးအလိုရည်ကြီးတယ်လို့ထင်ပါတယ်
الحق في الحياة الكريمة والتطور لأنه بالحياة الكريمة راح أزدهر كطفل وراح نبني مجتمع قوي في المستقبل إن شاء الله.
I have the right to an opinion and for it to be listened to and taken seriously.
Saya memiliki hak untuk mendapat pelayanan kesehatan yang baik sehingga saya bisa tumbuh dengan sehat.
Education is important for the personal, social, and economic development.
Why is life unfair? I see countries fighting. I see children wounded and orphaned. I see children starving and suffering from malnutrition. I see children not having a home, living on streets.
El mensaje sería que nosotros somos personas, no tenemos la mayoría de edad, pero pensamos igual que ustedes.
Every child under 18 has all these rights.
Amazing. Thank you, Kaylee. So I know Adriana introduced us and started us off with a really great question. So it seems like a lot of us have a solid understanding of what the Convention on the Rights of
I am a child and I have
but just so we're all at a base level understanding, we're going to talk a little bit more about what the CRC is. So the Convention on the Rights of the Child, aka the CRC, if you'll hear us referring to those interchangeably, is a document that incorporates the full range of human rights of children into one international treaty. These rights include political, economic, civil, social, and cultural rights. This document stems from the basic understanding that equal and unalienable rights for all constitute the foundations of freedom, peace, and justice, and that children are not only included in those that these rights apply to, but that they deserve heightened observance and awareness to ensure that they receive these rights. There are 54 articles in the CRC that call for children's rights in all of these senses. If you know any of the articles off the top of your head or happen to have a favorite, feel free to drop them in the chat now and we'll talk about those a little bit more later. The CRC is now also signed and ratified by 196 countries, which is more than any other human rights treaty in history. However, the United States has yet to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child as a whole. And we'll discuss this more in a little bit. So as you can see on the screen, just a couple of the core principles and features of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Not sure if they're popping up right now, but we'll discuss them regardless. So the 4 core principles are non-discrimination, devotion to the best interests of the child, the right to survival and development, and the views of the child. And some of the notable features of the Convention of the Rights of the Child are that children have a right to know their rights, children have a right to voice their opinions and to be heard, and that children have the right to health, water, food, and education. All right, we can head to the next slide. So just some key dates in the development and processing of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So in 1946, UNICEF, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, was founded. It was founded after World War II to provide humanitarian, developmental, and relief aid to children worldwide who were in countries ravaged by the war. Then in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, also referred to as the UDHR, was passed by the United Nations. And so the UDHR enshrines all people's rights to freedom and equality around the world. And another fun fact is that the UDHR is the most translated document in the world, with over 360 versions in different global languages existing today. In 1999, the United Nations adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the CRC. In 1995, the United States became a signatory of the Convention on the Rights of the Child under the Clinton administration, which displayed the desire and intention to ratify the document. However, to this day, the document has largely not been revisited, nor has it been implemented nationally or ratified. And then in 2003, one last quick slide. In 2003, the United States ratified 2 of the 3 optional protocols to the CRC on children in armed conflict and the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography. So the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography optional protocol aims to center children who face sexual abuse and exploitation as victims with rights, and to strongly encourage governments to eradicate these issues by criminalizing those who abuse these children's rights. The Children in Armed Conflict Protocol states that the nations will not enlist or recruit soldiers below the age of 18, acknowledging the deep physical and psychological impacts of becoming an armed soldier on children. And so jumping to today, not much has happened on a large scale, and the United States is still the only country that has yet to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's just a little bit about why the United States has not ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Firstly, lack of education and awareness. While we are all here now and very privileged to be on this Zoom together, we are privileged in knowing about the Convention on the Rights of the Child and in being in spaces that advocate for human rights and the rights of children. This unfortunately is not a national issue that is being talked about in every space. The CRC is often challenged as being anti-family. Opponents of the CRC say that it places the government in control of the decisions of children, something that should be between parents and children alone. The United States falls behind on many of the child well-being metrics that are part of what the CRC is, including that children under 18 are still able to and are actively being sentenced to life without parole. About 15% of children live in poverty in the United States, and among many other statistics that aren't shown on the screen. Another reason is that the United States has a perspective that they're better than other countries in a lot of the ways of child's rights and well-being. Many United States legislators and public organization leaders believe the United States does not need to sign on to another treaty, as we already have widespread measures to protect children in the United States. And lastly, the United States political system. It's extremely difficult to sign on to treaties and to get essentially anything moving in the United States political process, especially something that has been in the works for so many decades. And while this hasn't stopped local level changes from being implemented, no president since Bill Clinton signing on to the CRC has actually taken this platform and taken further steps to implement and ratify the CRC in the US. All right, so just a little bit more about children's rights in the United States. Again, obviously, especially shown that we're all here today talking about this, There are some amazing organizations doing fantastic work to further the rights of children and implement the CRC on a smaller scale in the country. So some of these are city and state resolutions that have passed either the Convention on the Rights of the Child or modified versions in different localities. The Child Friendly Cities Initiative, which are different city initiatives that Adriana was extremely invested and worked a lot with. So we're really lucky to have her on here to talk about her work in a bit. Governor proclamations, which is very similar to these resolutions, where governments and governors have signed on to committing to the parts of the CRC, and public organizations dedicated to promoting child well-being, which is where a lot of us on this Zoom are coming from. So really awesome that we'll all get to talk to each other and our experiences in a bit. All right, so that's just a brief overview of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And we're going to talk a little bit more about ourselves and our work and why we're here today as facilitators, and then get to speak to all of you. So on the note of the Child Friendly Cities Initiative, I'll pass this over to Adriana.
Thanks, Hallie. So in this section, a few of us as facilitators, as Hallie said, will talk a little bit about our experiences either with children's rights or human rights or youth activism, and what brings us here as sort of a point of inspiration for some, and also just some concrete examples, because I feel like sometimes a lot of the work that we talk about are ideals and can seem theoretical, but just giving examples to how they've been used in practice can be really important. So personally, this issue is really personal to me because I have a 6-year-old sister and a 13-year-old brother, and just watching them grow up, I always want to make sure that they have like the best future possible and they have the best environment that's healthy for them. And I really think that through civic engagement and through making sure that they know that their rights, they are able to become as best community members as adults as possible. Also, just growing up in San Francisco, there is a lot of inequities that are very stark and uncomfortable. Like I give this example all the time, but on one block, there are new multi-million-dollar condos being built. And then the next block, there are a lot of unhoused folks. And in schools, you can study with CEOs or children of CEOs while studying with people who don't even have reliable internet at home. And I think that combined with my personal background, made me really want to work towards both children's rights, especially on an education lens, and also making sure that more people are civically engaged if possible. So I founded this organization called SF Change, or it stands for San Francisco Communities Who Help Advance the New Generation of Education. But essentially, we worked with organizations like UNICEF's Child Friendly Cities Initiative and San Francisco Public Libraries to provide workshops on topics outside of the standard school curriculum to students in San Francisco. We've now since expanded to around 13 chapters in the United States. But in San Francisco, we were able to reach children, particularly on the topic of child rights, because this was a topic that did not exist in the curriculum and was not taught at all. I can't remember speaking to a single teacher in San Francisco who was either very familiar with the topic or has taught it in their class. And so, of course, as soon as they see that topic within the SF Change website, they're drawn to it because this is something that they weren't able to include in their curriculum on their own. So within our first year of establishing the organization, we reached around 4,000 students between the ages of kindergarten and 12th grade in San Francisco with just workshops on children's rights. So I thought that was really cool. And I thought it was important to show that when young people are given the opportunity to engage, like age appropriately, they're ready and very willing to. And so we just have to make sure we provide more opportunities to do so. But I can talk a little bit more about the CFCI in San Francisco. There were in this initiative, it initially started when someone brought it to the local board of supervisors in 2019. And since then, they've partnered young people with Mayor London Breed to host sort of a fireside chat to include young people in government. The CFCI also worked to reach, I believe, around 700 kids with educational workshops and surveys to figure out what young people wanted in a child-friendly city. They also started working in San Francisco with Salesforce to promote CFCI and to raise awareness and money for the cause. I think there's a lot of cool things that young people have been doing in San Francisco. There are a lot of organizations or small clubs, especially at a school level, that have worked towards children's rights. But the CFCI in San Francisco has definitely reached a notable amount of young people, especially to gather opinion and then create the mayor's plan, which now exists to uplift youth voices. And whether it is helpful is to be determined because it's supposed to be implemented soon. But yeah, that kind of wraps up my work with the CFCI and with SF Change. Obviously, in a very condensed period, I can talk about it forever. But I just overall, I think it's really important that young people are involved and are given opportunities to be civically engaged and actively sought after for their thoughts and opinions, because only then can they be genuine partners in a community. So I will pass it to Hallie to talk more about her experience. Yeah.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you for sharing and for elaborating on the CFCI. It's really awesome hearing about the work that you've done in San Francisco. So I'll start a little bit about where I got my start in human rights advocacy work. A lot of it stems from Human Rights Watch Student Task Force, which I was super privileged and lucky to have at my school where I grew up in Los Angeles. Also super lucky that we have Kristen on this Zoom, who was an integral part in me becoming who I am today and invested in human rights advocacy. So thank you, Kristen, for being on here. So in 9th grade, I got started with Human Rights Watch Student Task Force, just a little bit curious about delving into the world of activism and advocacy. And I was really pulled in by the passion and the community that was being built in this space, even at a high school level, which in reflection and thinking back now is so fantastic that that was able to be cultivated at that time in my life. And in that club, I not only became aware of new issues and was learning about things, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which I had never heard about before, but I felt empowered to go after these issues and to tackle them and to create tangible change. And we worked on voter registration, we worked on general awareness, we worked on workshops, we worked within local propositions and local government to create change. So this program was truly an amazing part of my life and my upbringing in working in human rights advocacy. And I'm really, really lucky that I was able to have that and hopefully expand into clubs like Human Rights Watch Student Task Force so other students are able to get involved. And this also fueled me into working with other groups and again, having those connections and feeling empowered enough to delve into different sectors of human rights advocacy, including on the Los Angeles Congressman Ted Lieu's Youth Advisory Council, where I was able to work with other students in Los Angeles and to tackle issues like gun violence, the houselessness problem in Los Angeles, food insecurity, housing insecurity, etc. We had a lot of issues that we were able to not only discuss, but create policy and suggest policy to the congressman and his office about, which was another way that I felt empowered, especially in a governmental sector, which I hadn't been part of before. As a young person, I felt extremely empowered to take on these issues and felt really lucky that I was able to have my voice heard in this way. Now, kind of moving on, we had COVID hit, obviously. So now, a couple of years later, I've really been able to tackle different issues in different sectors in college, and I'm up here in Berkeley now, so close to Adriana. But I've taken on kind of leadership in human rights spheres, especially with the ACLU. We're really lucky to have a college chapter here that works with the Northern California branch of the American Civil Liberties Union. and has provided me an opportunity to get more invested in parts of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and in advocating for them, including in criminal justice reform, both on a local scale and a national scale. One of our big projects has been over the past couple of years developing Know Your Right presentations, which we have worked with local high schools to present. And those have really talked about the rights that students hold surrounding police forces and interactions and immigration forces and interactions, and using the privilege and power that we have been able to receive from our community networks of college students and the Northern California ACLU to then disperse this information to those in the area. And that has been a really, really great way that I've tapped into the CRC and different articles under that document and really felt empowered from my communities to take that and create tangible action steps from there. That's just kind of an overview of some of the work that I've done. And also this past summer, I was able to work with HRE USA as an Edmonds Fellow, which was extremely rewarding. And I worked a lot on community engagement and development and learned about new organizations doing work that I had no idea existed before. And again, it just made me feel really empowered in this community and in finding spaces where youth voices are not only heard, but welcomed and accepted and wanted and really truly listened to. So just stemming from my work a couple of years ago, it really has fueled me into a world where I feel appreciated and accepted, and I'm super, super grateful to be in these spaces and to continue to talk to all of you and to work with you to find new spaces where our voices are heard and listened to. I'll pass it off to Maddie to talk a little bit about your work.
Thank you, Hallie. And this is my heart emoji for you. That was wonderful to hear from both of you. And I think probably the rest of you know why I was really excited to get to co-facilitate with these two. It occurred to me when we were having one of our early conversations that, like, I just want to hear their stories. You know, how do people like Adriana and Hallie like find this incredible, fascinating work young at a time when obviously they're making change right now, and you know they have lives ahead of them to make more. So I'm just, you know, thank you for scratching my itch, both of you. And I hope we can hear from more of you too. Briefly, my story as a former English language arts teacher, and I must admit, I was kind of a gypsy doing that. I have taught in public and private schools from Vermont to California, literally. And had the dubious distinction at one point of being licensed to teach in 5 states, which made people think, is there anything else we should know? But really what I felt at that point was that as many, I think, English language arts teachers might have felt, you know, even in the, let's say, 80s and 90s, is that there's a distance between Chaucer, Shakespeare, Spencer, and really what matters to teens. And there was a distance for me too. And so I explained to these guys that I feel like I backed up kind of into this interest really through service learning. And that was, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was teaching at that point in rural Idaho, and in a tiny town of about 700 people, where I first encountered like sort of active learning and experiential learning. And it was really because the students, when I said to them, you know, we really ought to have a student newspaper in our tiny K-12 school, they're like, heck, we need a community newspaper. So literally they took it to the streets and started drop boxes in the community and got people engaged and submitting ideas for, you know, really what they wanted to see in their community newspaper. And then if I promise you, I'm going to build a bridge to human rights shortly. But then if we fast forward to Minnesota some years later, I was fortunate to go to work then for the National Youth Leadership Council, which is based in, at the time was based in St. Paul and actually still is. And we did a lot of, you know, creation of student and teacher resources for experiential learning, all about civic engagement. And at that time, as some of you will remember, there was a real kind of audience for this. It made me excited again. It sort of regrounded me in teaching, I would say. And those were heady times in Minnesota because we had a lot of political support. And it was just as AmeriCorps was getting created, and there was sort of a so-called Minnesota model that was becoming, I would say, the foundation for this new domestic Peace Corps. Anyway, that was also a part of the work and exciting to me. But it was really in leaving that job and going and getting to know Christy and working with a Nobel Peace Prize Forum here in the Twin Cities and an organization called Peace Jam that I think I got actually, head on with human rights and child rights. And I see that framework as such an objective way, I think, to do some service learning and civic engagement. I think the human and child rights framework also galvanizes young people like Hallie and Adriana, shared in their own stories. It was shocking to the group of young people I was working with when they're like, wait a minute, there's this document and every other country in the United Nations has ratified it and we haven't, including South Sudan and Somalia. And so that really got them, this was a group of middle and high school students, excited to learn about, some of you will know the name Kailash Satyarthi, I'm sure, and Malala Yousafzai, who were the dual Nobel Peace Prize winners that year. And the young people I was working with at that time and I were working to build out an iBook so that other young people could learn about their work. Ahead of the really exciting thing was then this Nobel laureate Kailash came to the Twin Cities. And so the young people got to meet him and talk directly to him about all of his work on child rights in India, liberating young people from these rug making factories in the hinterlands of India. So that's kind of my story of backing up into child rights and finding it so compelling. And now I have people like Christy, Hallie, Adriana, the HRE USA gang, and Danielle, who I see is on the call too, to thank for keeping my interest going, certainly. And fortunately, Minneapolis is another child-friendly cities initiative site, one of the early ones. We're sort of walking in the shoes of San Francisco and learning a lot from them and from Houston too, and really hoping that in this really most challenging of times in Minneapolis, as I know you all know, with George Floyd's murder and all that has followed, that in a way that young people can lead the charge out of this time. That's my hope. So thank you all for listening to me, and we have time and we would love to hear from you about your personal stories and how you discovered this area, for many of you much earlier in life. And I wonder if we could just ask for volunteers. Would anyone because I'm genuinely curious as a teacher to know, how can we help young people discover this at the ages of Hallie and Adriana and younger? And so how did you all find it? I know many of you are graduate students. So would you just unmute yourself and share if you're willing to? I'd love to hear. Or if you're feeling shy, put it in the chat. But the more voices in the room, the better, may I add. How about if I pick on someone I can see? John, would you mind sharing your? Oh, good. Please go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, you're fine. I wasn't sure if it was working. My name is Francis. I'm actually in Kentucky. I found this, my college's website. They sent me an email about it, and I figured I would try it out.
Great.
See what it was all about. I'm actually an undergraduate. I'm earning my bachelor's in elementary education.
Perfect, Francis. And will you tell us where you're from in the country?
I was originally from upstate New York outside of Fort Drum, but now I live with my husband and my two kids in Marion, Kentucky. So over by land between the lakes.
Great. And so it sounds like you might be a pioneer bringing child rights to a curriculum in Kentucky.
Yeah, it would be something I think they would be interested in around here. Definitely a small town.
Oh, that's great. Oh, thank you for sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
John, I was about to pick on you. Do you mind if I circle back to you?
Sure. I'm not nearly as young as Leah. No. No, seriously, you all are going to be president. It's really impressive. Yeah, I've kind of backed into this a little bit, I guess. So I've been teaching at MSU, Michigan State, for about going on 9 years now. And in January, I'm moving over to the Human Rights Institute at UConn to work on a grant that they're running. And I'm kind of actually pretty new to the human rights space, actually. I'm traditionally a historian, but I did, my research was on education for kids in France post-war, and touched a lot on multicultural education and intercultural education, and the place and space of immigrants, especially in French schools. And so when my new department sent me out the listing for these things, I was like, oh, children. And, so that kind of struck a chord with me. So that's kind of why I'm here. So.
Ah, that's a great story too. So we already have sort of K-16 represented in just 2 answers. That's really wonderful. And I love hearing about history. I feel like this is the obvious place to situate this, but thank you for doing that in higher ed.
Okay.
And that makes me think about, next to you, I see Yvonne, who's just someone I know a bit through another project. And Yvonne, I'm wondering, would you share your story of how you came to human rights and child rights?
Sure. My dad was the mayor of a town during the civil rights era, and I saw him fight for justice and equity. And so I saw that as a child. And then I had a fellowship to Europe and couldn't believe how much better children got treated there. And I didn't know really about the CRC until I went to Europe. And then I came back, and now I am the US policy chair trying to get child rights in the US, which is really a task. So it's wonderful to be able to work with all of you.
Oh, thank you for that, Yvonne. I'm just selfishly grateful for your story, and fascinated that it also involves France, like Christy's story. So was anyone else inspired to share? Maybe especially from the younger ranks, because I'm like I say, I'm trying to figure out how we get more young people involved. We probably have time for like maybe about one more. Yeah, one more story. I'm looking at Jaylyn. Would you share yours, or Dante?
So I was emailed a link to this from my advisor. I'm doing my undergrad at Murray State. I'm majoring in social work and criminal justice. My dad was in the system when I was younger, and I believe that there needs to be reform in that area. Oh my gosh, sorry, I'm nervous. My focus is more in the juvenile court system, because I feel that the earlier people are kind of intercepted, the less hopefully the crime there will be. Because I just think that there's a lot of messed up things and a lot of messed up people, and kids especially, they need the support. And so whenever I read the title of this one, I thought that was most relevant to what I want to go into.
Oh, that's so wonderful, Jaylyn. Thank you. What a powerful story of making your way here. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing all of it. I think it's the part that draws me too. We did a fair amount of work in juvenile justice systems here with Peace Jam, and that was what one Nobel laureate said, don't ever stop doing that work. So thank you for carrying the torch. And Dante, did I see you go off mute, or did I just imagine that?
I did turn on my video. I have a cat and she's young, so she's very crazy. That's why my video hasn't been off, and my mic for a little bit. She's got the zoomies. I also stumbled upon this through my professor. I'm an undergraduate in social work, but I picked this specific like training or just even getting the information because I was in the foster care system. So I definitely believe that, you know, rights for children are very important. And just I work within advocacy myself. So advocating for those rights or just to let a child have a voice is very important to me.
Oh, that's also a beautiful story. Thank you, Dante. Wow. Well, and I so appreciate that some of you went more headlong rather than backing into it like I did. And thank you for just letting your curiosity lead you, and for finding us tonight. That makes all of our days. So I think we can now shift gears a little bit, and we'll give you a chance to talk with each other in some breakout rooms. And Kaylee is the master of this. But what we'd love to hear from you, we're going to, oh, thank you, Kaylee, also she has just posted a link there so that everybody can just look at a one-pager of the 54 articles of the CRC. So as you might imagine, abbreviated, but thanks to Save the Children for that. And I just have to say hi to Nancy, who I was excited to see pop up on our screen. So what we'd like you to do, Kaylee will put you into rooms of 4 each. And if you would all please just take the time to introduce yourselves, and we'll give you about 15 minutes on these 3 questions. So just whomever has something to offer, we'd ask that you please ask for somebody to be, maybe somebody be a scribe, somebody be a reporter, just so we can be efficient when we're sharing back out with the large group. And the 3 questions, which again, Kaylee will post in your breakout rooms, are, can you think about what you see as the most interesting intersections with child rights and current issues, especially on this pre-voting day eve? Where do you see child rights situated? How can it apply to your learning or work environments, do you think? And some of you have alluded to that in sharing your stories. So again, thanks for getting our brains turning. You've brought up some really interesting ideas. How have you seen young people take action, or how can you imagine young people could take action? So sort of both sides of that coin. Does that leave anybody with questions before we'll take, again, about 15 minutes. And Kaylee will be our maestro on that. Anybody have questions? Okay, so I think here we go, and we'll visit you as facilitators, just in case anyone comes up with a question while in the breakout room. And we'll look forward to seeing you all in 15 minutes. Thanks, Kaylee. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some interesting time together and that it didn't feel too rushed. I know that I got lucky with a group of 3, and I see some new faces. So welcome. We have Cody. Hi, glad you could come. And we may have lost 1 or 2, but let's do a little debrief, if you don't mind, with the larger group. I know it's always easy to say have a scribe and a reporter, and then it's always hard to remember to do that. But could I ask anyone who feels like they found a pretty interesting intersection of a current issue and the Child Rights Convention on the Rights of the Child? I will say I have a personal favorite out of our group, which was courtesy of Jaylyn. Jaylyn, would you share what you talked about first with us?
To be honest, I don't remember. I have bad memory.
That's okay. You talked about sex education and health education.
Yeah, so where I'm from, it's a taboo topic. And I think that it's really important for especially young people to know how their body works and the risk that comes with doing other things, but not in a negative way. I think sex should be a positive topic. And our school board had like a meeting on whether or not they were going to include that in the curriculum. And everyone was like, why would you want to teach my kids about sex? Like, it's not just about sex. It's about being healthy and like learning about healthcare options and things like that. So that was one thing that this discussion kind of brought up for me, is thinking about how limited that is and how some parents aren't comfortable talking about that. I was lucky enough to have my mom who talked about that, but it's because her mom didn't do it either. I mean, it was a different time, but I think now it should just be a positive topic and everyone should teach it. I mean, I think even kindergartners should know the basic anatomy, because heaven forbid like something were to happen to them. I don't think nicknames are appropriate a lot of the times, but I think the conversation should be open all the time. And that's kind of just what we were talking about.
Yeah, thank you. That was really a favorite for me. Other groups who maybe had a neat discovery like that about an intersection with one of the articles, maybe given the current political climate, even if we can generalize a bit. How about I pick on Cody since you came late, Cody? Did you get in on that part of your discussion? You might not have.
I didn't. I got the time zone wrong, unfortunately, but I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's contribution.
Don't worry. Don't worry. How about out of anybody else's group? Hallie, from those you visited, was there an interesting topic or intersection?
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about really interesting ways to kind of tap in, especially, with young people on college campuses and high schools. Katie and Yvonne, if you want to kind of jump in, cut me off, please feel free. We talked a little bit about kind of modern implications and ways to get involved. We talked a little bit about the Trevor Project, and we talked about, it was Cunha, the Kentucky United Nations Youth Association, I want to say, and just how, there are organizations that are working to involve people in advocating for their rights and for the rights that are listed under the CRC. So if either of you want to elaborate on that, please, absolutely. But we had a really nice conversation.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, John, for meanwhile, John offered something in the chat, a great book that his 6-year-old loves. It sounds like Artie is developing some language on health and sex education himself.
Yeah, he had a lot of questions about puberty last night. He wondered if puberty breaks your brain. And we were like, it's kind of a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, the cutest question ever. Oh, how about if we go to our second question about how it applies? Did any of you find some interesting ways that the convention, I mean, obviously for teaching, that's probably, I think, John, your story about as a historian, even seeing the connections. For anybody else, I'm looking, I think, Katie, you're also a little bit newer to the group. Is there some interesting way that the CRC might connect to your work or student environment?
So I mostly work with students as an adjunct, but because I work in the alumni side of things, I mostly work with everybody post-graduation.
Yeah.
But in the adjunct side of things, when I do get to work with students, I will say, like the sex education topic, like Jalen said, actually we try to get students to select their video for, I teach basic public speaking or those kinds of things. And one of the selected videos is sex education because of the fact that it's important or the fact that you can have a non-linear career path. And that's kind of where we start them off at. And because in Kentucky, that's an issue, and I'm in Kentucky as well. So that's why I'm like nodding along with her. I'm like, yep, that's an issue, big issue. And because one of my classes is dual credit actually. And I kept waiting for the high school to call me and complain and have parents complaining.
Oh my gosh, Katie, it sounds like you're in just the right place.
Maybe not, but
I think so. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for offering that. I'm impressed by Kentucky. I'm just, thinking about all that's going on and what we can hear. I'm trying to multitask a little bit with
Kristen, I think, had her hand up.
Oh, good. Jump right in, Kristen.
Kirsty. She's familiar enough with my program, as is Holly. I just wanted to share that maybe it's something that, especially those of you working at all different ages, not just people who are under the age of 18, which is the only group that the CRC actually applies to. But we were talking about in my group where Dante was sharing about the advocacy that he works on with foster youth. And at the start of every semester in Student Task Force, we pull out the language of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child and make sure that every one of our members, all of our leaders know what's in there. They're not going to memorize it, but they know and get familiar enough with it. So that way, as we move through our annual human rights campaign, whether it's related to refugees or climate change, right to education, juvenile justice, regardless of the topic, child soldiers, Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month, they can find ways to highlight the risks that children face with each of these human rights issues. And it helps empower them. And Hallie, feel free to share if you don't agree with this, but we see the students that really take the time to look through the language of the CRC, that it helps them tap into that vocabulary, regardless of how comfortable they feel with the language of the larger campaign, that it seems to empower them to know that they have these rights. And it doesn't have to be a long conversation, but just referring back to it periodically through whatever advocacy or lesson you're teaching can really help them.
And Kristen, you're in LA, right?
Yes, I manage the Human Rights Watch Student Task Force program.
Oh,
which
great.
Our program is based in LA, but we're actually expanding because we figured out how to do it virtually. So if you know high school students that are interested, feel free to reach out to me.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, thanks, because I know you've got Hallie as a graduate. So that's wonderful. Well, and maybe we can now go to the third question of how we have seen young people take action. And I'm thinking about Dante and Layla, who I know is recovering from the flu, but if either of you have maybe on your campuses seen things, or Jaylyn, we were just talking about that when our session time ended, but I'm wondering if you all are seeing some interesting things happen around you on campus or can imagine them.
I can definitely say that, and I think Jaylyn and me are from the same college. I'm not too sure, but I believe I've seen Jaylyn around. But in Kentucky, it's very, it's like one step forward, two steps back type of situation. So we have students, we have people who will set up booths around campus and they will speak on a topic they're very passionate about. We have seen, like, I know I've seen more stuff kind of pop up around, safe sex. And I think there was even a group that came out and gave, condoms and things like that, and actually, spoke about that, because even as we age, it's still, in Kentucky, it's kind of taboo to talk about that, like Jaylyn said. And that, like, it's just really not really vocalized to talk about it, I guess. And so that was really nice to have. There's been booths about, keeping the earth more clean and trying to recycle. But I haven't really seen any other than in my social work, like building, not a lot of talk of giving more like children, like talking about the children's rights and like the, letting children kind of have that, I guess, stage there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in a way, maybe having the language for it even. I mean, I feel like in a way, you who are students are our emissaries on this, right? You get to say, and that's a right,
Absolutely.
Yeah. As I love it that you're studying social work, Dante, and that, you know, there'll be, I think, a beautiful fit there too, as Yvonne could attest, I think, because I think that's part of her. Is that fair to say, Yvonne? That's part of your background? Yeah. So, well, thank you all. I wanted to point out that Nancy in our group also, one of her last questions to us was about this intersectionality of these issues. And I thought that was a powerful way to sort of think about it as she was talking about, you know, COP27 and immigration issues. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Nancy? I just thought it's sort of like the power of 54 articles, you know, means that it can affect, I feel like, so many aspects of our lives and children's lives.
Yeah, well, in terms of I was just really advocating in our group for, if we don't, you know, treasure our children, we don't have a future. So everything we're all doing with our lives, you know, to me centers on that. But I was talking about, you know, I know that some young people are very, very passionate about the climate crisis, and their energy goes toward that. And then in this group, we're seeing a lot of people who have an interest in human rights and children's rights. And but just realizing the climate crisis is going to literally put certain countries underwater, and those people are going to have to migrate. And then there's this tremendous pressure, you know, push against immigration, and what kind of crises, you know, human rights crises are going to come from that. So I guess, yeah, I was kind of advocating for the idea that all of these different issues that may be in silos that people are working on are so interrelated, and the more we can have that awareness, I think the more power we have in actually making a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I thank you for seeing that, and thank you all for entertaining these thoughts and looking for what we maybe see as possibilities in these next days, especially as you know, we sort of get ourselves reacquainted maybe with the 54 articles. And I wanted to add just a couple hows to the kind of punctuate the end of this. Kaylee, if you don't mind bringing up the slide from the new tactics, we'll just, yeah, this is a great organization I'm guessing many of you know of, but they take an approach in sort of inspiring youth action where they identify the problem first. They literally come up with a problem statement. And then what I find powerful as someone who comes out of a slightly different discipline is their mapping of the terrain. You know, I should back up and say creating a vision, then mapping the terrain of possible players and contributors, and even possible, you know, opposition to their stance on an issue. Explore the tactics and take action. And I would just say, I'm not doing this justice, but Kaylee is going to add a link to their website in the chat. And so if you're interested, this is an interactive thing online, and you can literally click each of those little triangles and get some really wonderful materials. So this is what got me all excited about how human rights can really kind of almost objectify in a positive way a social issue that we might grapple with in service learning in a slightly different way. And Kaylee, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, I was just going to also give a little shout out to my former organization, the National Youth Leadership Council. This is what is fondly called IPARD, and the cycle being a youth-led cycle of discovery. And similarly, I think Kaylee's going to put in the chat nylc.org, and there's a free resource section of this website. And I just always like to sort of point out to people, and it's often a moment of self-discovery if we're doing this as a workshop, that the action itself may seem small compared to what you're doing, you know, in anticipation of the action and in preparation for it, and then really in processing it. And of course, we think of it as, you know, this can be direct action or more indirect action like advocacy work. But I think there's also a real role for child rights and human rights in framing service learning issues. So I hope that one or both appeal to you, and maybe John, as you go on to your next steps and are helping create the next generation of historians, we can create activist historians. So those are the two resources we wanted to share with you on some hows, and certainly I'm happy to stick around later if anyone would like to talk more deeply about either of those approaches. Maybe just a quick show of hands, how many are familiar with New Tactics, with that organization? Christy is, of course, and Nancy's nodding. I say that because I realize I have a regional bias here, and I didn't mean to do that, but they're both organizations based in St. Paul that do work nationally and internationally. So I hope you'll look them up. And then I think I'm just doing a quick time check on where we are, 7:25. Could we give ourselves maybe 5 minutes, because I think we have 5 minutes to spare at the end, for a little bit of a break, and people can go off and do what needs to be done. And we would just ask if you'd think a little bit about this question of what has been your favorite or most impactful moment while doing human rights work. And if you feel like you're new to it, don't worry, that doesn't matter. It can be something you've seen or something you can imagine. But if you've had a moment like that, would you come back in 5 minutes and we'll take a moment. Adriana will get us to talk about it. So thank you all. We'll take a little break and we'll see you at, I think, what is basically 7:30.
I can also put the question back or into the chat again, in case we need a refresher. But essentially, for a few minutes, we're just going to talk about a really lighthearted question, and it's, what has been your favorite or the most impactful moment while doing human rights work? So if anyone wants to share into the chat, you are more than welcome to. I can get us started with like a verbal share out, and if anyone wants to share, you're more than welcome to. So for me, I went to a pretty standard public elementary school, but the most unstandard part of my experience is that I just by chance happened to get the same teacher in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, because she, Miss Vermillo, she got a promotion basically every year where she would have the opportunity to teach the next class. And so I got her for kindergarten, and then I was like, wow, I'm super lucky to get her for first grade. And I was the only kid that transferred all, like, from the past 2 years. I also went on to her to like get second grade from her. So she was a teacher that I was very, very close with, and she with me, and like our families knew each other, etc. And so as I was doing my work with SF Change, we started providing workshops during the COVID-19 pandemic about children's rights. And these were to classrooms across the Bay Area. And I didn't know, but my teacher at the time no longer worked at the school that I was at. So one day I got a request that came in that said, from Miss Vermillo, like, there is a workshop request. And I didn't think anything of it. You know, I was like, maybe this is a different one because it's not from my elementary school. This is from one way later or at a different area. And so after replying to that, I got a follow-up email, and she said like, hey, like, I was your teacher, you know, like, how are you doing? That kind of stuff. And so that following month, I ended up going to her classroom and presenting to her classroom of students about children's rights and human rights and that kind of stuff. And I thought that was really impactful because it was a very full circle experience. I got to reconnect with her. And that was someone I was close with for a long time. So it was cool to be able to almost be on the opposite end of it, because she's someone who's taught me a lot, and she was able to see me grow. So that was my favorite experience. Does anyone else want to share out loud or either in the chat? Please feel free.
I'll jump in because I'll do the opposite, because this was back in the 90s, and we were running a program here in the Twin Cities, well, in the state, that was called the Partners in Human Rights Education Program. So we were training a lot of educators and and community leaders to do human rights, and think about it. And 3 teachers got so excited that were early childhood educators that they wanted to create a children's rights curriculum for early childhood education for young kids and parents. And so then when my daughter was 2 years old, and my husband and I, we basically piloted their curriculum at the community ed. And so my daughter was learning, what does a child of 2 years old needs to grow and develop? And, oh, you need a name. And then we'd have time together, but then the parents would also have their advocacy circle around, okay, how can we be advocates for young people and our children in this room? So it was kind of a fun circle, I guess, of learning. And I'll drop that curriculum for parents or for with folks working with young kids in the chat as well.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. That is very, very cool. And I look forward to learning more about the curriculum. From here, if anyone wants to share in the chat, please feel free. But I think that was a good segue into our next activity, which is on the platform Google Jamboard. But before I do that, I will pass it back to Christy to talk more about the HRE USA working group.
Oops, I shouldn't have stolen time from all of you to have shared.
Yeah.
But I'll share again. So with Human Rights Educators USA and what we're about to do for a bit of time together is think about really how could this network continue to support young people in activism and their work, and how can adults, the youth adult partnerships really be effective. And so the teaser of this is what we kind of share on our Jamboard will be brought to some of the working group that's going to be continuing this discussion on November 17th, which 10 a.m. you all are invited. Well, feel free to, I'll drop my email in the chat too, if you want more information about it. Yvonne's one of our co-chairs of the HRE USA working group on children's rights that we're kind of relaunching for some of this kind of discussion around youth adult partnerships. So that's, and I'll pass it back to our wonderful Adriana.
Great, thank you for sharing. So our next activity, that's a really good segue, is on the platform Google Jamboard. And so with this, it's kind of like a brainstorming opportunity, and I can share onto the chat, and I'll also screen share. But it is a shared platform where everyone is able to either edit or take a look at like other people's answers to the different questions. And with that, let me share my screen. Also, if you aren't able to get onto the link, or if you aren't able to open up a new tab, no worries. I will share my screen, and then you can also put answers into the chat, and I can put them onto the Jamboard for you. But essentially, how this platform works, Google Jamboard, is if you click onto the link, you should see something similar to this. And on each slide, which you can navigate from each frame, like up here, there are different questions or different prompts. And what you can do is click this sticky note feature on the left. And if you click it, you can write your thought down, and then you can save it. And then you can hit cancel, and then you can also move around your sticky note and change the size of it. So I would highly recommend everyone take a few minutes. I can guide us through it. So you can spend about 2 more minutes on this first slide, which is to leave your name, association, and contact information if you feel comfortable doing so. It is an opportunity for people to network if they would like, and to share information. At any point, you can also move on from this frame to the next one by hitting this caret thing, where the next prompt is different organizations or conferences that are related to human and children's rights work. So if you would like to share, please feel free to add so on that second frame. On the third frame, we are asking any gaps in professional networks and support. And then on the fourth frame is just how HRE USA can help. So Christy talked a little bit about this earlier. So just how the organization can contribute to either children or human services. Cool. So I will give around like 5 minutes for people to do so. And if you aren't able to log onto the Jamboard, again, feel free to put it into the chat like Christy did. And I would be happy to put it onto a post-it note. Thank you to those who put your contact information. I see that there's some really cool and uplifting organizations: March for Our Lives, Brady Campaign, the Global Center for LGBTQI+ Freedom and Education. Please feel free to continue adding and click onto the third and fourth slides when you get a chance. I will give a few more minutes for people to have the opportunity to fill out the Jamboard. If you have not moved on to the third or fourth questions, please feel free to do so. This is really cool to see just personally, but also I know for HRE USA, we're really interested in seeing in what ways we can help, and brainstorming that together can be really helpful. Great. So it seems like has been on a pause for a few seconds now. So I want to thank everyone for sharing and putting their ideas down. If anyone has one that they would like to highlight and say out loud, please feel free to unmute and share. But hopefully you've also taken some time to read other people's answers. Okay, great. I will pass it on to Hallie to start wrapping up and talking about resources.
Awesome. Thank you, Adriana. And thank you everyone for adding to this Jamboard. Hopefully we'll be able to keep working on it for the next 15-ish minutes that we have together, and we can all kind of build community within ourselves as well to continue our work. So just to talk a bit about some resources that we've mentioned before in this workshop and some that we haven't talked about yet. We'll display a PowerPoint screen too that has these, and we'll send them out afterwards. But there are booklets on the Convention on the Rights of the Child that we have linked on our HRE USA website, and they're very convenient little handouts. I wish I had my copy. I have a few of them at home, but they're about this big, and they have the Convention of the Rights on the Rights of the Child printed out in them. They're a great resource. We received them in Human Rights Watch Student Task Force, and they were really great to have a physical, tangible, oh, awesome, yes, booklet that talks about the CRC and the rights underneath this treaty. They're a really great resource. So we have those linked on here for purchase. We also have a couple resources from UNICEF. So we have some frequently asked questions about the CRC that provide a little bit of a basis and a foundation for understanding what the CRC is, why the US hasn't ratified it, a couple of the topics we touched on earlier. I have another UNICEF resource that talks a little bit about the resources of the CRC. Human Rights Watch has quite a few resources about the CRC as well. They have a Q&A similar to the UNICEF frequently asked questions page. They have a Human Rights Educators USA Convention on the Rights of the Child campaign page that is newly developed, and we have one central location, and we'll drop again the links to all of these websites in a few minutes. But there is one central web page that links out to a bunch of other resources. It's really, really handy. It's on our website. It's a great resource to use. Going back to Human Rights Watch, the Human Rights Watch Student Task Force also has a toolkit for working on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's one that I used when I was participating in the program, and it's fantastic. It has a ton of resources and places to go to look for inspiration on working and engaging with activism around the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Human Rights Educators USA also has a couple bulletins on the CRC and ways to get involved. And the Child Friendly Cities Initiative that Adriana talked a bit about before, going to their website will kind of help to get involved a little bit, hear more about the backstory and how to engage with the program and your city. And yes, as Kaylee said, we'll send this slide deck out after, and all of the links are clickable. You'll be able to access them. And I highly encourage everybody to take a look and see what works best for whichever sphere of youth activism you're engaging with. All right. And I'm going to pass it off to kind of close off our session today. Back to Maddie.
Thanks, Hallie. Well, and thank you. I know this has been a lot sort of in a short amount of time, but thank you all, you brave souls who've hung in here through all of it. And I hope you feel you've made some new connections. I feel like I'm excited, for example, to learn that Cody's a local, and that's very exciting. And you know, really that's part of our goal with this session, is for us to find one another. And Jalen, I hope you'll thank all your peers in Kentucky who also managed to show up even through a fog of illness. And we just wanted to stop with a little wrap up, let's say, with a little inspirational video. Some of you have seen, I'm sure, but I never tire of watching it. So I think that we'll do that. And then maybe if you all could just thinking of one thing you'll take away from this evening that we'll share out at the very end. But let's see, Kaylee, would you mind sharing the
They say, Children should be seen and not heard. They say you'll understand when you're older. You're just a kid. But a kid swam for 3 hours on the open sea to save 18 lives and became an activist for refugees. A kid broke through barriers to keep migrant families together and delivered a message of hope.
Let us fight with love, faith, and courage so that our families will not be destroyed.
A kid was forced to kill in a brutal civil war and became a human rights activist, freeing other children from violence. A kid fought for girls' right to education, was shot in the head in retaliation, and won the Nobel Prize.
This award is not just for me. It is for those forgotten children who want education, who want peace, who want change.
And a kid spoke truth to power, inspiring a historic movement against climate change.
We kids shouldn't have to do this. I wish that the adults would take their responsibility and do this instead. But since no one's doing anything, we have to.
Kids are speaking up. Kids are demanding their rights. Kids are acting now for a better tomorrow. What will you do?
I never tire of that. Does she pose a
I think Maddie has frozen. So okay, you're back, Maddie. Go ahead.
No, I'd love to hear what you were going to say, Christy.
No, I was saying you were frozen, so we didn't catch what you were saying.
I'm sorry. I was just curious if her words made you think, okay, this is one thing I can do, or this is one next thing I'll do.
Can I comment?
Okay, yeah.
As someone who's constantly engrossed in all of this, I think sometimes I watch these videos and I become emotional and fired up, but then I just get really overwhelmed with how do I even start? And so I guess that's something I want to learn from all of you. And I kind of put it on the Jamboard too, of being in an area where it's not common and it's not talked about a lot, and how do I become a pioneer in that space? And I just don't know where to start a lot of the time, because a lot of the work I do is in different regions virtually. And so, but I always am like craving this need to want to do something in my own community and where I'm from. And so but I guess I just get overwhelmed knowing where or what or how to begin the work in a space where it's not commonly talked about or welcomed, I guess.
And is it fair to say that is that your state, Kaylee, that you feel, or your?
Yes, yeah, my state, yes.
The state of Utah. Yeah. But I would just say that you're taking many first steps for all of us by making us appear technologically adept on this topic. So thank you for being the magician that you are. But then whatever next step I would love to, as Cody says, keep submitting grant applications. That's one thing we can all do, right? It's not our favorite thing, but we can do it. Yep, I hear you on that.
But I'll say
Yeah.
something, and maybe this is true for all of us. I mean, I think we need to have that grounding locally, but oftentimes I know, and I've been in this field for a long time, the folks who have given me the energy to keep going have been put, well, there's been obviously I've been blessed with having people around my community too. But it's also been that folks outside the national community, because when you're like, oh my gosh, you're getting all of the negative on the home front, you need the hope And that's both on a national level for me. And I've been very fortunate to have some global partners in this. So you can see them like pushing against all odds wherever they are. So I think it is kind of that balance, balance beam, or maybe it's a teeter-totter, that you at times you can feel maybe you're the one that's feeling really good, but others are feeling low. So you've got to kind of keep giving them hope, and then vice versa. But on the local aspect, I think we do have to try and figure out how can we bring a few partners, starting with one partner that you think may be interested in your local community. And I'll give the action that I'd propose is see if that person might come on November 17th to this breakfast, that just to kind of hear, and where Yvonne's going to be talking a little more about the Children's Rights Learning Library that's now a tool online, but that we're going to be trying to figure out what can we do, because it is. I kind of felt like with the video, I was like inspired, but at the same time, the weight was heavy because it's like, oh no, where do we begin? So I guess my little part is, okay, I'm glad that we have this November 17th breakfast to at least reconnect with some coffee and think about, okay, well, what might we do together?
Yeah, that's a good reminder, Christy. Thank you. Thank you for keeping that on our minds. And Kristen, yeah.
I guess I would say for somebody who's trying to figure out where to get started, try to identify a single issue that is impacting, like, I guess I want to ask the question of what are you trying to get started with? Are you trying to get a conversation going around the CRC? Are you trying to get youth involved in some sort of action? Like, identifying what you want to accomplish or what your hope or goal is more important than anything, because otherwise then you don't know who to talk to. You don't even know, from Christy's idea of bringing somebody to this meeting, well, but what do you want? Who do you want to talk to? Who is going to benefit from that? And why are you inviting them to that in particular? In student task force, we always, our students are always telling us they want to work on these big issues. I asked a student last week, I was like, so what do you want to do in the spring, since our voting campaign is transitioning out as election day approaches? And he said, I'm really interested in LGBTQ rights and immigration. I was like, great. What does that mean? What do you want to do about it? Are you wanting to call elected officials? Are you wanting to start a letter writing campaign? Are you wanting to do classroom presentations? What does that look like to you? And I think, especially for people who are struggling in areas where these conversations are not common, that's what you should figure out first. What do you want to accomplish? The rest of it will start to fall in place, because you'll start to think about people in your community that can help you accomplish that goal. I don't know if that was helpful at all. Just
yes.
I had to share that because that's what I get from that video. We've used that video in student task force many times. And for me, when I watch it, I'm inspired by these youth, but they all knew what they wanted to do first. Greta wanted to make a stand about climate change. Malala talked about right to education, and she did not want her own education impacted, right? All of these young activists, they have something that they're trying to accomplish, and they've found a way to make it big. But you don't have to get that big. All you have to do is just start with that one-on-one conversation, but you need to know what you want to do with it first.
And Kristen, you also tap nicely, I think, back into that new tactics and human rights approach of kind of map the terrain. And to Christy's point of like invite one person to a breakfast, or and kind of figure out who maybe identify the players. So thank you for reminding us of getting specific. Does anyone from the higher ed world, besides grant writing, is there anything else that occurs to you as a first next step?
I was just going to piggyback on the point from before about, in those videos, they're obviously inspiring, but you don't want them to be paralyzing, right? I mean, anybody could be Malala, but not everybody has to be Malala. And I think, it's about finding that kind of, even if it's relatively small way to make a difference. And part of being a pioneer, like you're talking about, is you're reducing the cost for everybody else to start doing what needs to be done, right? I mean, what's the old saying, like the first person through the wall always gets bloody, right? But you start to break down the wall, and I think, you know, even if you're making these kind of small moves, or, you know, starting to change things in your own sort of local sphere, that makes it easier for other people, including young people, right, to start kind of following behind you. And, you know, maybe they'll be the next Malala or Greta, or, you know. So I think, you know, yeah, it's inspiring, but don't, you know, you don't want to be paralyzed by this giant shining example, right, where you can't, you know, where you then you're like, I can't move, right? You don't want to be in that position.
Yeah, such a good point. Such a good point, and a nice reminder, John, to keep on keeping on. And it sounds like Kristen was giving a nice shout out to Hallie for being our LA Malala, and I love that too, that there are these there are Malalas among us and Greta's among us, and they might still be at the, you know, like individual holding a poster outside the Parliament building stage. We just don't know, and we can yeah. And that's such a sweet thing from Christy, that Kaylee is a Malala. So there you go, Kaylee. Don't be so hard on yourself. Yes. Well, I just want to, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I had in mind that we could do a little gratitude circle, and maybe I just get to express my gratitude that you hung in there until 8 p.m. in the beginning of your work week, and inspired me so much. And I just love that we had such a nice age range in this gathering, which I think is just, you know, powerful, and also a lesson to the fact that we need to all keep going on child rights, and that there's a role for every age. So
Maddie, I think you should do your quick go around. I'll be inspired by hearing the last voices of everyone.
Okay.
So go ahead and pass it to somebody, please.
Okay, I'm going to pass it to you, Christy.
Oh, no. Well, I want to say I'm inspired by all of you. Thank you for being here. You've given me hope and a desire to keep on keeping on. I'm going to the next person on my window, which is Jalen.
I feel inspired by all of the different stories that I've heard. It was really interesting, kind of learning where everyone got their start. I'll go to the next person I see, which is John.
Well, everybody already took everybody else. So yeah, you all are inspiring. You're all doing amazing work. Like I said, you guys are going to be president someday, and I'll be happy to vote for you all. So go for it.
Thank you, John. Will you pass it to someone?
Let's see who's next. Hallie.
Again, everybody took all the good ones, but it's really just been amazing hearing from all of you and being in this space with everybody. And hopefully we're all able to continue to build this community and connect in the future. And I will pass to Cody.
Hey there. I think the word that comes up for me is connection and a network. While I studied peace and human rights in my master's, I don't think I ever engaged with this group before. And therefore, I'm so excited in the Twin Cities community, but in this global community to be connected. Adriana, can I pass it to you?
Yeah. I think it's really inspiring that there are so many like people from different sectors who wanted to learn about children's rights today. Like, yeah, it was cool to see the intersection from different places. I'll pass it to Kaylee.
Yes, I'll finish this out. I just am inspired by everyone giving up time to be here and to connect. For me, I feel like I'm just always amazed in this field, and that's why I just can't leave it. Even when I try to diverge, I'm always brought back because I'm fueled by how willing everyone is to give up time just to connect and to support one another. So I'm grateful for that.
Great. So did we hear from everybody? Did everybody get a chance? Okay, good. Well, thank you all again for being here, and we'll really look forward to seeing you. We hope at the next one of these. Kaylee, do you want to just tell us when and where?
Sure. Yeah. So the next session will be on ending gun violence and campaigning. It's actually going to be facilitated by the Amnesty, well, I guess the US Amnesty team. And so it'll be absolutely wonderful and a great place to connect for those of you who want to be involved and connected to Amnesty International. They do a lot of amazing work in the US and globally with children and youth. So I think that's a great place for you to connect. Little plug to this session, but it will be next week on Monday night, same time. And we hope to see you all there.
And I'll also mention the curriculum one is that following Saturday.
Yes. Yep.
So
for those of you who are doing work with teachers or classrooms in general, it will be focused on incorporating human rights in the classroom and really practical work of how do we do that and workshopping that together. So that will be not this Saturday, but next Saturday.
Great. Well, thank you all again. And I hope you have wonderful weeks. And I hope we all get to run into each other in these professional networks we're going to create, right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.